The problem of evil is one of the great philosophical challenges faced by the theist. It is the problem of evil which I wish to consider today. It is said that God is omnipotent. God has unlimited power. It is said that God is omniscient. God knows everything. And it is said that God is just. The Holocaust happened on God's watch. Did it not? If he is omnipotent, he could have done something about it. If he is omniscient, he had complete awareness of it. And yet God did nothing. He spent years being fully aware of immense depravity and fully capable of putting an end to it, and he did nothing. For years he watched unlimited depravity and inhumanity, cruelty and brutality, and did not so much as raise a finger. That is the problem of evil. How is such a God just? What excuses his actions? If any person committed such an act, we would call them a monster. Imagine it. A man has absolute knowledge of the Holocaust. He has a large button sitting before him. If he simply presses it, the Holocaust will come to an immediate end. He sits in front of that button, knowing everything, and doing nothing for years. We would call such a man evil. Given God's omniscience, he would have been aware that the Holocaust was coming. He would have known that historical events would lead to that atrocity. And yet he did not a thing to push that chain of events off course, to avert the most depraved of atrocities. And this does not just go for the Holocaust either. Every historical genocide, millennium after millennium of slavery, rape, murder and torture, constant cruelty and brutality, endless depravity and inhumanity, and yet God did not a thing. He is omniscient. He was fully aware of it. He saw it coming long before it came. He is omnipotent. He could stop it all in an instant. And yet he does not a thing. Human history is clogged with cruelties and brutalities, depravities and inhumanities that occurred on God's watch. He knew about them and could have done something, but he did nothing. And somehow we are supposed to believe that he loves us and is just. Some allege that this arose from God giving us free will. The first problem with this is that we do not have free will. The second problem with this is that God could wait for us to make a bad decision before then intervening before anyone could actually be heard. The free will counter-argument makes God sound particularly sadistic. God gave his little creations free will. Now he sits back and watches us brutalize one another. He hears the screams of the slaughtered, raped, and tortured, and he does nothing. God sits there for years watching immense cruelty and brutality. God does nothing, and yet we call him just. We claim that he loves us. All the while he allows our fellow humans to be brutalized and butchered. Am I supposed to believe God let millions be brutalized so we could have free will? What kind of freedom is the freedom to slaughter? Can't we have free will with God intervening when and where it is morally necessary? And what is so valuable about free will? Is it still worth having even after slavery and genocide, millennium after millennium of cruelty and brutality? Is free will of such great value that the evil of the Holocaust can simply be overlooked? God could have stopped slavery, the Holocaust, every cruelty and brutality, every depravity and inhumanity, and yet he didn't. He had full awareness of these things due to his omniscience, and full ability to prevent them due to his omnipotence, and yet he did not lift a finger. Some claim that evil is not God's fault. He merely gave us free will, and we made the choice to do evil. Yet God's omniscient nature means he must have known that we would do evil if he gave us free will, and he gave it to us anyway. If person A gave person B a handgun, knowing with certainty that person B would go and use it to slaughter 10 innocent people, would person A be free of moral blame? I don't think so. God must have known that we would do evil if he gave us free will, and yet he gave it to us anyway, and for some reason refuses to take it away, even after its atrocious consequences were made certain. The problem of evil is a rather difficult argument for religious people to contend with. It is not easy to allege that God is omnipotent and omniscient, as well as loving and just. God could be loving and just if he is not omnipotent or omniscient. God could be omnipotent and omniscient if he is not loving and just. God cannot be all of these things at once, however. At least not by any reasonable definitions. Perhaps there is a great counter-argument that I have not considered here. If you can think of one, do offer it to me. One could come up with all manner of unhinged theories as counter-arguments. One could start claiming that nobody other than ourselves can actually suffer, or even exists at all. That many people exist alone amongst fake people, people who cannot suffer, people who we will interact with, and through those interactions, demonstrate our moral character. Of course, such claims are entirely without evidence. If made, they would be nothing but a truly desperate attempt to defend the indefensible. The problem of evil is philosophically very complex. Theology is philosophically very complex. The problem of evil is a serious matter which theists would be wise to contend with. If you can think of any strong counter-arguments or supporting points, I would love to be made aware of them.